Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Bernie Sanders draws a massive crowd during his Fighting the Oligarchy tour in deep red Utah. You made this possible. Labor organizers submit twice the signatures needed to put the bargaining ban to voters. And Salt Lake City police cameras. They see you, and you will see more of them. Joined today on for the program, our Salt Lake Tribune politics reporter Robert Gehrke. Robert, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning, Tom.
Good morning. And reporter Tony Semerad is with us as well.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you with us, and hopefully be joined here shortly by State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. Let me start with you, Tony. We'll talk about police cameras a little later in the program, but this is breaking news, essentially, ruling just yesterday by a federal judge. Here's the headline: The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints wins again as a judge tosses out the tithing lawsuit. The faith says donations are wisely managed. So this is federal judge Robert Shelby. What did he say?
Well, Judge Shelby has been considering for a number of months now a motion by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its investment company to dismiss a lawsuit, a would-be class action lawsuit that sort of bubbled up from 5 or 6 different states around the country, including Utah, where plaintiffs, former and disaffected, or current and disaffected Latter-day Saints, had sued over tithing, alleging fraud with regard to tithing. These suits had been filed around the country, were grouped together in April of last year and sent to federal court here, of course, in the backyard of the LDS Church. And while the arguments in this case had focused on some pretty high-minded issues in the Constitution having to do with religious liberties and what right did these defendants have, or did these plaintiffs have, to sue the church over the sacred donation practice of tithing. Judge Shelby basically, he did dismiss the case, but he ruled on what you might call technical grounds. The case and all of these various plaintiffs' cases had in some ways been prompted by an IRS whistleblower's disclosures in the 2020 window, February of 2020, where this portfolio manager for Ensign Peak, the church's investment company, went public with some pretty explosive allegations as to how big that fund was and how it was or was not being used. That's where the $100 billion figure started banding around in terms of the church's wealth. And because that, in effect, started a statute of limitations clock in 2020, the plaintiffs, at least according to Shelby, missed a legal window. Their statute of limitations would have been 3 years after they would have taken notice of this information from the whistleblower that prompted their lawsuits. And so as a result, the first of these lawsuits would have bubbled up around October of 2023. And so they would have been just outside this, about 9 months outside this 3-year window, according to Shelby. And so he's dismissed it on that basis, and then on some court rule technicalities, just in terms of how the plaintiffs have put their case across in terms of how they've argued it and proven or not proven the elements of fraud under federal law. And this case had been watched by religious liberties advocates and people kind of in that legal space for a more for those issues, for issues having to do with church autonomy and the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. And although Shelby has now dismissed this case with prejudice, he's ended up not addressing those issues and was very specific in the ruling in saying that the judicial canon required him to look at more sort of basic issues in the case before getting to constitutional issues, and that's what he's done. And so this, and he has shut it down outright. In addition to this ruling, he has filed an order that essentially closes this case that's been working its way through the federal court system for about 2-3 years now. So for Latter-day Saints that pay tithing, are interested in the church's finances, it's another pretty big win for the church.
This comes on the heels of the Ninth Circuit, right, ruling against James Huntsman. Any clues in that ruling, the Ninth Circuit, as to whether a different lawsuit could be filed under this general area, maybe with different arguments?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The Ninth Circuit, in sort of a similar fashion, it did not, in overturning James Huntsman's case, or rejecting James Huntsman's case, very similar case, a wealthy Utahn who had felt that he had been misled by church leaders in terms of how tithing was being spent, and sued in 2021 to recover his own donations. And the Ninth Circuit, of course, rejected that, but it also did it in such a way that did not address these underlying issues of church autonomy, at least not directly. That was also a ruling that in some ways some of the justices stopped short. Some of the judges stopped short of delving into those. So in terms of future tithing cases, that's going to be a very interesting topic to watch. We've seen between this case, the James Huntsman case, and some that were filed prior to this based on the whistleblower's allegations, they've not fared well so far in the courts. There is another case that is still pending before the 10th Circuit, but there's ways in which the federal bench has sort of closed off legal avenues for these cases, and it'll be interesting to see how this evolves.
So are there, just out of curiosity, any other churches? I imagine other churches would be interested in this case. Did any file Friends of the Court briefs in any of these cases, or I imagine some interest?
Yeah, there has been, in the Huntsman case, in this case, there have been substantial amicus briefs filed by similar religious groups that also have tithing as part of their financial rights. There have been legal concerns by nonprofits as to what any sort of substantial ruling on what donations might look like in this space could affect their operations and their future donations. There is an astonishingly similar case in the Church of Reunification. We used to call them the Moonies, based on the name of one of their leaders. They have a very similar dispute in which church autonomy or religious autonomy has been invoked, a pretty major financial dispute. So this is a very yeasty, active space in the legal world with regard to how the courts view the financial independence and and church autonomy in these circumstances.
So what did the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints say about this?
As you might imagine, they welcome this. They issued a statement late last night saying that the legal claims had been rightfully dismissed by the court. And again, they have invoked, in some ways, the religious nature of this practice. That these funds are considered sacred by the church, and it's an expression of faith according to their statement, and it's something that allows the church to fulfill its many missions, its divine missions. And they also sort of reiterated, so as to reassure members that donations are very carefully and wisely managed. In addition to mounting arguments with regard to the First Amendment, church attorneys have been consistent in their legal arguments that there wasn't a misrepresentation with regard to tithing and things like spending on City Creek and Beneficial Life, the church-owned insurance company, and they've sort of taken a dual path of rejecting any claims that they did anything wrong, but also sort of invoking their First Amendment rights. Yeah, so as you might expect, they were very welcoming of this decision yesterday.
Salt Lake Tribune reporter Tony Semerad telling us about this. Thank you, Tony.
You bet.
Let's go to a quick break, and then we'll be talking with politics reporter Robert Gehrke. The story we'll be talking about following the break: labor organizers submit twice the signatures needed to put the bargaining ban to voters, and we've had word from Governor Cox as well. He said he never liked this bill, even though he signed it. So we'll be talking to Robert Gehrke following a break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. More following this. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We turn next to Salt Lake Tribune politics reporter Robert Gehrke. Robert, thanks so much.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, big news here. As we know, unions and others have been out gathering signatures to try to get a referendum on the ballot, I guess, next year to repeal HB 267, I think it is, right? So I guess, first of all, remind us what 267 does.
Yeah, let's start with a little bit of the background. So HB 267 was this anti-union bill. Basically what it does is it says public employee unions cannot negotiate their contracts with their public employers. So we're talking about police, firefighters, school teachers are probably the most directly affected. And these public employees unions are typically the ones that go to, meet with management and hammer out terms of the contract. Representative Jordan Tusher was the sponsor of this bill during the session, and his argument was essentially that when government agencies are negotiating with government employee unions, taxpayers are the ones that lose out because they're it's two wolves arguing over the sheep, I guess is what it is. But and so he thinks that he wants to do away with the practice of having these public employee unions doing the negotiation. He says it would include more people in the process. Unions got really involved. There were a bunch of rallies during the session. They were up there every day arguing against this bill. But it passed anyway early in the session, and Governor Cox signed it into law on Valentine's night. And so the unions launched this referendum. Now, the referendum, we'll kind of explain that a little bit, I guess. People are pretty familiar with the ballot initiative. It's the way that the public can make a law by gathering signatures and putting it on the ballot. Referendum is similar to that. They gather signatures, but it's to repeal a law that's been passed by the legislature. So the labor groups in the state went out and started gathering signatures. Utah has the hardest referendum process in the country. They had to get over 140,000 valid signatures from registered voters, and they only had 30 days to do it. And so there's a good chance you've been approached by some of these people gathering signatures, as you're going to the grocery store or whatever. They went out and on earlier this week, they submitted their signatures. April 16th was their deadline to submit signatures. And they said they're submitting more than 320,000 signatures. Now, there's a process for validating these signatures, and some of them will be thrown out either because the voters aren't registered or they signed their name wrong or didn't have the right address on there, things like that. But the 320,000 gives them a pretty good cushion for this. So that where my working.
Sounds like you cut out a bit, Robert. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no. I just said that they now go through the process of validating these signatures. They have to get 140,000 of them valid, but they also need them dispersed across 15 of the 29 state Senate districts. There's specific targets that they have to reach in each of those districts. They range from about 3,000 to 5,500, depending on how many voters are in those Senate districts. And so now we kind of wait and see. The clerks have validated so far about 35,000, 33,000 of them. And we'll go through the process. There's another piece to this, though, too. The opponents, and the opponents have set up a political issues committee within the last couple of weeks. They get to go out, and they have 45 days to go out and approach everybody who has signed the petition, or target specific areas, specific Senate districts, if they choose to do that, and try and give them an opportunity to rescind their signatures. And so we won't know for sure if this referendum is going to be on the ballot until June 21st is the deadline for them to say one way or the other if it's going to be on there.
So all this back and forth, and which will continue for 45 days, even, right? The opponents, as you said, can go out and try to get people to take their name off. That's probably why I've been seeing a bunch of ads. The ads I've been seeing are against the referendum.
Yeah, they started running ads. Americans for Prosperity began running ads. There's web ads. I think Utah Parents United have been pretty aggressive in trying to convince people not to sign. Now they pivot into this mode of going out and approaching people and trying to get them to withdraw their signatures. And we've seen this happen before, actually. And what can happen is, okay, maybe they have well above the threshold in 14 of the 29 Senate districts, but only have a couple hundred over in the 15th. If they go out and target that 15th Senate district and get enough people to rescind it, the whole thing falls apart. So, we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's a challenging process, and that's part of the reason we've only seen it used rarely. I mean, the last time we came close to seeing a referendum was when the legislature passed this big tax package that would have increased the sales tax on food. Groups, including groups from all across the political spectrum, went out and gathered signatures with the support of Harmon's. And got enough signatures, then the legislature relented and said, okay, we'll repeal the law and go back to the drawing board on that one. So that one never ended up on the ballot. In 2007, there was a voucher referendum. And again, this was largely driven by UEA and their national affiliate, the National Education Association. And they got it on the ballot and voted to repeal the state school voucher law at that point. And that held up until just a couple of years ago, as we know, when they passed the school voucher bill. So it's a really hard process. We don't see it happen very much. If June 21st rolls around and they do have the signature requirements, then HB 267 is put on hold until the 2026 election, until the upcoming election. So it would be paused. And then you're going to start seeing ads. The money's going to roll in from groups for and against this. It's been interesting to see, because Utah has become, in this regard, sort of a test case for other states where anti-union groups would like to see this similar policy implemented. And so it's sort of the canary in a coal mine in a way.
You include your story in a poll. It looks like right now that if it went to the ballot right now, it would this law would be overturned.
Yeah, I mean, the poll was a little bit, the phrasing on the question was a little bit not exactly how it would be asked on the ballot, so I wouldn't read too much into that. But it does kind of show that there is broad support for this, and I should say that the labor groups that were out gathering signatures said that 320,000 it's such a huge number. 1 in 10 of every Utahns, almost a fifth of every registered voter in the state signed this, and they say that's a strong showing of where the public is on this issue. We asked Governor Cox about it yesterday, and he said that he wasn't surprised, because organized labor has the organization to gather these signatures, but 320,000, he conceded, is a really large number. And he said he would be open to the legislature coming back and revisiting this bill during a special session this year, because he says he's never been a supporter of it, even though he signed it. He did it he was trying to work out a compromise bill that might not have been quite so heavy-handed, wasn't his words, but that wouldn't have been so punitive to the union. So, there's still a lot of cards to be played in this hand, and we'll see how it goes over the next 18 months.
It's interesting. According to your story, Governor Cox said he warned legislators that UEA could be strengthened by this legislation.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I mean, he said that in his opinion, UEA hasn't done much for the last 25 years at the Capitol. They've kind of, from his viewpoint, lost their credibility, lost their mojo. And so he said, you're playing with fire here, and you could end up really empowering labor in the state. And I think to some extent he was right. I mean, he was 320,000 signatures again is huge. It's easily the most successful signature gathering campaign we've seen in the state history. And and labor is energized over this, I think. And national money's pouring in. They raised over $2.5 million, most of it from labor groups across the country. And so yeah, I mean, it's maybe they picked a hornet's nest in some way. I did have an exchange with Representative Trisher yesterday, and he's of the opinion that when voters look at this, they'll recognize that it's good policy, that it actually allows more people to have a voice in these contract negotiations, and in the sense that people who aren't members of the union can be involved. And so, he's still convinced it's good policy, and they're going to back it up. This political issues committee that was formed hasn't raised money yet, but we've been hearing that legislators are going to help finance that anti-referendum campaign.
So this was the signature gathering, pretty expensive, as you note, and I guess money, the bulk of the big piece of the money came in from National Education Association, right?
Yeah. Of the 2.5 plus 2.6 million, I think is what it was last time I looked at it. There's probably been more coming in since the 16th, but they of the 2.6 million they'd raised, about 1.7 million of it had come from the National Education Association. And then there had been, other donations from other education unions around the state, New Mexico, places like that. And also, donations from Ask Me, AFL-CIO, local union chapters, local labor chapters, because this is, and maybe this kind of goes to Governor Cox's point, but it's not just the public employee unions that are pushing this, right? They're getting support from other labor unions that aren't necessarily public employee unions. They're all getting on board and unifying on this. And so, at this event on Wednesday, when they dropped off the signatures, we mainly saw the public employee unions. We saw the Fraternal Order of Police speaking. There was a nurse from the University of Utah Hospital who was saying that this is they're standing up for their rights and to negotiate, and they were gratified to see the public coming out and supporting them in such an overwhelming fashion.
Politics reporter Robert Gehrke is telling us about this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's turn to State Watch reporter Emily Anderson Stern. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom.
So we want to talk about the Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They're on tour. I guess that's a weird way to say this. They're heading rallies around the nation, and they recently did a rally through deep red interior West, including Utah. So how big do we think the crowd was on the University of Utah campus?
Well, the official count was around 20,000. You have the 15,000 seat Huntsman Center, which is where the University of Utah plays basketball, that was filled. And then they said there were around 1,000 on the floor in front of the stage, and there were about 4,000 outside who weren't able to get in and were sitting in an overflow area.
So big crowd, a lot of energy. What did Senator Sanders say?
He echoed a lot of the same themes that he's had throughout the tour. I watched some of his previous speeches before he came to Utah, And a lot of them, are talking about pushing back against the current administration and creating kind of a political system that he says, cuts out billionaires. He pointed out that he talked about Elon Musk's position in the Trump administration, but also talked about, you know, that at Trump's inauguration, that he pointed out that three of the richest men in the world were sitting behind President Trump. So that includes Elon Musk. It also includes Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. And he said that he pointed to that as evidence that the US is in an oligarchy from his perspective. That's a big purpose of the tour is to give from people motivation to push back against the current administration, the current state of government.
So, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spoke as well. What did she say?
Yeah, and she kind of talked about, how she got involved in politics. Utah obviously is an extremely red state. It's where, President Donald Trump won by more than 20 percentage points. Um, but, she said just because that's the state of politics here in Utah now, she said that she believes people can change that. She said one of the ways they can do that is just by getting involved in politics, no matter the background they come from. And she talked about how she got involved in politics and how, she was once a waitress. She said that, basically everyone in the audience could essentially, do the same, get involved in grassroots organizing, um, and change things.
Also, the Senate candidate, Caroline, is it Gleich?
Yeah.
I should know that since she ran for Senate. What did she say?
She kind of she introduced Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but she kind of prefaced the speech making some of the same points, right? Like um she's a professional ski mountaineer, and she said she got involved in politics because she just wasn't happy seeing the way the country was going. And she wanted to try and do something about it herself.
Now, you note that there were some MAGA flags and I guess, some MAGA folks around. How many of them do we think?
Well, as people were lined up outside, and when I was speaking to people in line, there were people who lined up, as early as 8:30 in the morning for an event where the doors opened at 3:30. Um, yeah, just walking up and down the line, there were trucks that kept driving by with Trump flags and different flags that, MAGA flags, flags that just said had, Trump's face on it. And we're honking at the folks waiting in line. And then there was a family that had set up outside where, there were about a half dozen or so of them. They were holding Trump flags. They were holding uh, an AI generated image of Elon Musk and Donald Trump dressed as Robin Hood. Um, yeah, so there were definitely some folks there who disagreed with the message that was being brought and wanted to show folks in line that whether, they were standing right by the line or they were driving by honking.
Now, you did talk to several people in line. Tell me about some of those.
Yeah, there were a number of folks I talked to, and some of them, people were there for different reasons, really. I talked to a young couple where the wife said she was due to give birth the next week. And they talked about how they previously had had a miscarriage and she had a hard time accessing the care she needed after that. And, she attributes that to abortion restrictions in Utah. Currently, abortion is legal up to 18 weeks, but there's a near total ban on that is being challenged in court. Um, and she really saw that as making it more difficult for her to get care. And so, she and her husband said one of the reasons they were there was because of what, how they say their reproductive rights have been impacted over the last several years, with more restrictions and abortion laws after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And folks trace that back to Trump because of the justices he appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and a lot of how he spoke in the past about how one of his motives was to overturn Roe v. Wade. Um, and there was a woman who her family has lived in Utah since the 1960s, because of Hill Air Force Base. They were an Air Force family that came here. And she pointed out her identity, that she's a woman, that she's over 70, and that she's Hispanic. And she said, all of those things make me vulnerable to the changes the Trump administration is making. She told me that she also doesn't like the changes she's seen to reproductive rights. She said that she is worried about the future of Social Security. And she also talked about how, because she's Hispanic and because, she said, because I'm brown, she worried about how some of the US's immigration enforcement methods could impact her. She lives in Mill Creek, where ICE agents detained a man who was a citizen, and it was after a traffic stop. And so, it makes her concerned about how she could be wrapped up in that. Uh, and then I also spoke to a student at Utah State University, and she's transgender, and she worries about her continued access to healthcare. Um, and so, really, there were such a wide range of people. And overall, the thing they shared was disappointment in some of the policies that have already been enacted by the Trump administration since in the few months since he took office.
Well, thanks for telling us about this. Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with their Fighting Oligarchy tour that made a stop in Utah. And State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern has told us about this. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're taking another break, and when we come back, we'll be talking once again with reporter Tony Semerad. Here's the headline: Salt Lake City police cameras. They see you, and you'll see more of them. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. More following this. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We bring back a Salt Lake Tribune reporter, Tony Semerad. Tony, thanks.
Hello.
So, very interesting. Salt Lake City police cameras. The headline says they see you and you'll see more of them. So the city's putting out more of these cameras?
Right. Salt Lake Police Department has a fleet, if you want to call it that, of about 60 of these cameras now. The boxier kind of static ones that you see mounted on poles or on the sides of buildings, that sort of thing. And then these kind of more autonomous trailer cameras that can be towed to specific locations, have hydraulic necks that can be raised, and a number of sensors kind of on the top of the unit, to about 60 existing cameras over time. Over the next year or so, the city's going to expand that to about 93. The latest budget round, according to the Salt Lake Mayor Aaron Mendenhall's latest public safety plan, calls for an addition of 10 of these cameras, and then the city's got a grant request out to the Department of Justice to fund another 14, I believe, which would push us towards this total of 93 coming up. I think perhaps more importantly, the police department is also working towards a real-time crime monitoring center, which will be fed by all of these cameras to a location at the downtown headquarters, the police headquarters, where activity that's captured via these cameras can be monitored live. And that center at headquarters is expected to be up and running by 2026. This is assuming some of these requests from the mayor, these budget requests, are actually agreed to by the city council. So an expansion of cameras, but also this notion that the police will be evolving towards a sort of a live monitoring center downtown. There's been, considerable concern about public safety in the parks. There's a move to deploy some of these cameras in some of those locations to sort of fortify police response and give them kind of nuanced intelligence as to what they might be going into. And interestingly enough, in some of the public safety plans goals for the Jordan River, they have targeting illegal encampments along the Jordan River and drug activity. The police are increasingly deploying drones that are have sort of camera capabilities, and some of these additional cameras will be deployed along the Jordan River as part of a series of cleanups that they're doing there. So it's an element of this broader public safety plan that the mayor has implemented and continues to implement. Very wide ranging a plan that includes social service components, different approaches by law enforcement, additional patrols and camp cleanups and that sort of thing. So it's an element of that plan, but it proves to be a pretty substantial element right now.
Now, there are critics, right, ACLU and others, who say security fine, but we don't want this verging into surveillance.
Yeah, the American Civil Liberties Union, Libertas Institute, other sort of civil rights advocates have long raised concerns about government surveillance of all kinds. In this specific category, the ACLU has raised privacy and data security. They are, kind of highlighting the notion that is this technology being deployed against specific kind of underrepresented populations, namely the unsheltered in that case, and they're advocates for their rights with regard to privacy, and they're signaling to the public that they need to be aware of some sort of false trade-offs, if you will, between sort of the notion of privacy and public safety, and noting that there are concerns about some of the sophisticated technology that is deployed in some of these cameras, and they targeted facial recognition specifically and artificial intelligence. Now, the Salt Lake Police Department is very specific that technology, facial recognition, is not deployed on their cameras. And the police department more generally is, the policies governing these cameras and the statements from the police department show they're very sort of nuanced as to the public's values, Salt Lake residents' values with regard to this. And what this seems to hinge on right now is the idea of surveillance. These cameras are deployed, but there's not really somebody at the police department right now that's monitoring them all the time to make you sort of feel like you would be watched. These are collection tools that they can then go back to if there's a sort of a crime incident that's captured by the camera, and sort of review the footage. But as far as the police department is concerned, they do not view this as surveillance as such at this time. But that's obviously going to be an evolving picture as we move towards this live kind of crime monitoring center down at the police department. And there, as civil rights advocates will tell us, there's some important questions ahead in terms of how residents feel about this sort of notion of stepping up surveillance, as it were.
Now, you point out in the story there already are a bunch of cameras. UDOT has, I don't know, hundreds of cameras around, point at streets, I guess, to look at traffic. They're private cameras. What's the policy? Can police access footage from a private camera?
Well, so these trailer cameras with a private property's owner's permission, they can of course be deployed in public thoroughfares and public areas, but they can also be deployed on private property if the private property owner agrees. But just to back up a little bit, our environment is saturated in some ways with these cameras. If you look at those that are deployed on private commercial buildings, you're seeing a lot of these trailer units, for example, in shopping center parking lots and that sort of thing. A lot of those, most of those, in fact, are privately owned and privately deployed. Police work itself is rife with cameras. Salt Lake Police Department doesn't use dash cams, but they do use body cams and a host of other devices to capture evidence, and that sort of thing. In terms of access to those private cameras, the police department has a pretty strict policy that it doesn't do any surveillance or viewing, if you will, through privately owned cameras. Now, if there's been a crime incident, detectives think there might be some footage captured somewhere, they can approach a private camera owner and ask if that footage is accessible. But in terms of direct access to those cameras, that's strictly forbidden by police department policy right now. But then, if you back up just a little bit, that Utah Department of Transportation system they talk about, there are thousands of cameras deployed monitoring roads and streets, and that technology is, of course, super helpful in some ways. There is also a very extensive network of license plate cameras in operation in the city that sort of regularly and quite randomly capture license plates around so as to preempt any accusations of profiling. They just sort of capture them all. These police cameras we're talking about are capable of capturing license plates, but only if you go back. They're not programmed to do that. This is a separate license plate system. So yeah, the reporting on this was quite eye-opening with regard to just the sheer amount of cameras, that are capturing our movements in modern society. But yeah, there are some interesting conversations, I would say, ahead about public safety and how all this fits in.
It's interesting. One person in your story, couldn't find their name quickly. They said, you can have all the cameras you want, but if you don't have the manpower, it doesn't really matter. It's talking about, what if a camera catches something, but then you don't have a policeman to send out to take care of it?
Well, yeah, and that interestingly enough came from a Rose Park resident, and we just sort of need to acknowledge that the West Side and the Jordan River are very much a hotspot right now in these public safety deployments that the city is doing, and these residents are very well aware of not only the limited, according to them, deterrent effect of these cameras, but also the notion that, okay, if these are viewed as a force amplifier, this is something that's extending our police resources. Is there another question there as to whether or not we have enough police officers, and the city and the mayor are very aware of the need to recruit additional officers and add to those resources as well. But yeah, what you're hearing there is in some ways the canary in the coal mine, as one council member put it, in that West Side residents are really at the focus of this public safety initiative right now, and that puts them in the thick of this debate about cameras as well.
So one more issue on this, very interesting story. These cameras, I understand it, and I'm seeing photographs here, the police cameras have a big badge on them, right? They're labeled. Part of the idea here is deterrence, right? Or do we think they're a deterrent?
Well, that's an interesting question. The police definitely say they are, and there are definitely some residents that are happy to see those show up in their neighborhood. These are, interestingly often deployed after a major crime to kind of monitor the area in some of the police policies. They talk about managing large scale police situations, but also kind of monitoring the need for services around the city and that sort of thing.
Salt Lake Tribune reporter Tony Semerad has told us about this. Thank you.
You bet.
So it's now time for Underplayed Stories of the Week. Let's start with Robert Gehrke. What's your Underplayed Story of the Week?
Yeah, so last night the Utah women's gymnastics team made it through the national semifinals, so they'll compete for the gymnastics final on Saturday. Pretty exciting. They didn't do great on their first rotation, but the bars was the last one up, and they totally crushed it. Number one, LSU's knocked out, so tomorrow evening you can tune in and watch the Utah women try to win the national championship.
All right, yeah, and find that story at sltrib.com. Emily Anderson-Stern, what's your Underplayed Story of the Week?
Mine is from my colleague, data reporter Megan Banta, who stopped in at a news conference for the governor. And, it was kind of about Utah's economic rankings by a conservative organization. But she heard him make a comment that he has instructed the state's agencies to prepare for a recession. I think, in this current place and time that Utah's Republican governor is saying that may be an indicator as to what might be coming.
All right, yeah, interesting story. sltrib.com for that one as well. Tony Semerad, what's your Underplayed Story?
Well, so folks at Salt Lake County got an interesting presentation from the officials with the LDS Church about Temple Square this last week, just sort of heralding all the renovations that have been going on at that landmark. And they're expecting between 3 million and 5 million visitors to attend the public tours when the Salt Lake Temple actually opens the 6-month open house in 2027. So little glimpse of what's to come. Everybody's seen the work going on down there. So we're starting to get a glimpse of when it'll all be done and people will be able to see what's happened.
All right, SL Trib for that one, as sltrib.com, I should say, for that one as well. We've been talking with Salt Lake Tribune politics reporter Robert Gehrke. Robert, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern has been with us. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. And reporter Tony Semerad has been with us. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Tom.
Thank you. You've been listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Hope you'll be with me next time. Thanks for listening.